Well, as we indicated, the monthly inflation indicator today ticked down under 5%. As falling fuel prices and fruit and vegetables took the edge off rising prices for rents and other food and beverages. Markets, as Ed just explained, jumped on the better than expected number with the view that the Reserve Bank now can sit back for a while and just wait and see. But there is a warning here. The Bureau of Statistics says if volatile items like fuel, vegetables and holiday travel are stripped out, then the decline is much more modest, from 6.1% to 5.8%. So let's get the reaction from the Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor, who joins us from Melbourne. Angus, always good to have you on the program. Is this the end of inflation, the high inflation we've seen here in Australia?
Well, it's still high inflation, Ross. There's no doubt about that, 4.9%. If you'd asked a few years ago whether this was high inflation, everyone would have said, yes, that's high. And we also know there's some categories that are extremely high, 15.7% for electricity, over 13% for gas, milk and bread, 10% or more. So there's very significant increases in prices in all of those categories. And of course, the one that's gone down most is fuel, and we know that's likely to come back up again. It's a very, very volatile item, which is why the trim mean is a higher number. Look, Ross, it is clear there's still a lot of work to do. There's a long way to go here. And the point I keep making is there's much government can do. The Reserve Bank only has one lever, and that's interest rates. They're much higher than they were. We expect them to stay higher for a long time now. Sustained higher interest rates is the expectation of the market. But there's much more government can do, and we do think they have the wrong priorities, they're distracted, and they're making some of the wrong calls in industrial relations, in energy policy, in competition policy, and we've seen that with the airlines just in the last few days. These are calls which are putting extra pressure on inflation. Fiscal policy, which we think is adding to inflationary pressures, over $7,000 of extra spending for every Australian added since Labor's come to government. All of these things are adding pressure, and it means we're going to have higher interest rates for longer, and that's certainly the market's expectation.
OK, so take me then to the airlines, and everybody is now concentrating on it. It'll be barely a blip in these inflation numbers, but it's indicative of what goes on. If you try and protect the industry here in Australia, Australians pay higher prices and their interest rates stay higher for longer. But there is other examples where this government's trying to protect industry, and give you one good example, suggestions by Chris Bowen, the Energy Minister, that importers of steel or cement or aluminium might have to pay higher tariffs because they're not using green energy as Australian producers will. Is that sensible economic policy?
Well, you know, just in the last week, the government's made a big song and dance about competition policy at exactly the time they were shutting out a major competitor from the airlines market. Now, we've had Chris Richardson point out how stupid this is. We've had Rod Sims, former ACCC chairman, of course, and Alan Fells both come out and say this is driving up prices, and yet this is the government's idea of competition policy. It gets worse, Ross, because what they then did is carved out airlines from their competition policy review, which is not going to come down with its final recommendations for another 2 years. So this is not a government serious about bringing down prices. If you're treating competition policy with such disdain as to do these sorts of things, you're not serious about beating inflation. You're much more focused on other things. And this is why I say I think it's a government that is distracted. It's focused on the wrong things. I don't think it's just competition policy, by the way. I think it's broader productivity policy, fiscal policy, industrial relations. All of these things are putting us in a position where the concern here is we're going to have higher interest rates and higher inflation for longer than we otherwise would have had.
OK, go back to Qantas. Is Qantas an airline that needs any form of protection from the government right now?
I think it's an industry where competition serves customers well. It's as simple as that. And I think it is almost invariably true that competition serves customers well. In my experience, Ross, and certainly airlines is one of those industries. So they should embrace competition. Everyone should embrace competition. It's a good thing. It sharpens you up. And I think the head of Virgin has made that point in the last few days, as I have said, too did the former productivity committee, the ACCC commissioners, indeed, Alan Fells and Rod Sims.
Okay, so then take me to one other aspect of protectionism, because quite clearly now you've had the Prime Minister say he would not have privatised the Commonwealth Bank had he been around in those days. You've got the conversation about Chris Bowen wanting to put extra tariffs on imported steel and other products, and now you've got this situation with Qantas. I'm just wondering whether we're becoming more protectionist in this country and whether that is something that you're in favour or not in favour of.
You know, we had an extraordinary era through the 80s, 90s, early 2000s of productivity gains in this country, which we all benefited from. We saw real increases in prosperity. Aspirational Australians were able to get ahead during that time period. It was an extraordinary time period with great benefits for Australians. And we're seeing a government now wanting to roll those things back, roll them back. They want more protectionism, as you rightly said. They're talking openly about the benefits of renationalising. These were really significant changes that benefited Australian consumers enormously. They're talking about competition policy as shutting out competition. I mean, you know, this is really going back on those extraordinary gains.
Angus Taylor, always good to have you in the program. Many thanks for your time today.
Good on you, Ross. Thanks for having me.